The harsh crack of a bullwhip split the air as Nora Patterson stumbled forward, the coarse hemp rope cutting into her wrists as she was shoved onto the makeshift auction platform in Caldwell, Idaho. The year was 1875, and for a young woman with no family and mountains of debt, this was what passed for justice in the Idaho Territory. Next up, a fine young woman from back east. Strong arms, educated, can read and write. Starting bid at $50. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square where a crowd of miners, ranchers, and merchants had gathered for the monthly labor auction. Nora kept her head high, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. 22 years old and being sold into indentured servitude to pay off her late father's gambling debts. She had come west with him seeking a new start after her mother's death, only to find herself alone when pneumonia took him last winter. The debts he'd accumulated quickly surfaced, and the bank had wasted no time in exercising their right to recoup their losses. $50 for 6 months' labor. Do I hear 60? The auctioneer circled her like a predatory bird. Look at those hands. Gentlemen still soft enough for housework but strong enough for the fields. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure watched with narrowed eyes. Preston Vance leaned against a hitching post, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his brow. At 30 years old, he'd seen enough of the frontier's cruelties to know injustice when he saw it. The woman on the platform stood with dignity despite the rope around her wrists and the dirt on her once fine dress. Something about her quiet defiance stirred something inside him. "I see Hargrove's interested," muttered Samuel Wilson, the local blacksmith who stood beside Preston. "God help her if that old snake wins the bid. 3 women have run away from his place in the past year alone." Preston's jaw tightened as he watched Augustus Hargrove, owner of the largest cattle operation in the county, step forward. The man's reputation with female servants was well known but overlooked by a town that depended on his business. $100, Hargrove called out, his voice like gravel. A murmur went through the crowd, an unusually high bid for a 6-month contract. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. $100 from Mr. Hargrove. Do I hear 110? Preston pushed himself away from the post. $200, he called clearly. Heads turned. Preston Vance rarely participated in these auctions. He ran a modest ranch outside town with a small crew of paid hands. He had no need for indentured labor. The woman on the platform looked at him directly for the first time, her green eyes meeting his with a mixture of wariness and something else, perhaps a flicker of hope. $200 from Mr. Vance. The auctioneer could barely contain his excitement. "Mr. Hargrove, do you wish to counter?" Hargrove turned, his heavy jowls quivering with anger as he assessed Preston. $250, he spat. $300, Preston responded immediately. The crowd grew silent. This was becoming more than a simple labor auction. It was becoming a battle of wills between 2 of the area's prominent ranchers. $500, Hargrove finally said, his face reddening. "And that's my final offer. No slip of a girl is worth more than that." Preston stepped forward, moving through the parting crowd until he stood directly in front of the platform. $1,000, he said calmly, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. $1,000 was a small fortune in Caldwell, enough to buy prime grazing land or a decent herd of cattle. Hargrove cursed loudly but backed down, stomping away through the crowd. "Sold!" The auctioneer banged his gavel with barely contained glee. "The lady's contract goes to Preston Vance for $1,000. Nora was pushed forward, stumbling slightly as she descended the rickety steps. The county clerk rushed over with papers for Preston to sign, which he did with a quick flourish before handing over a bank draft. "She's all yours, Vance," the clerk said, handing him the end of the rope that bound Nora's wrists. 6 months of labor, as agreed by law. Preston nodded curtly and gently led Nora away from the square, ignoring the curious stares that followed them. He didn't speak until they reached his wagon parked at the edge of town. Only then did he turn to her. "Miss, I'm Preston Vance. I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here." Nora lifted her chin, determined not to show fear despite her precarious situation. "Nora Patterson. I suppose I should thank you for outbidding that other man." "No need for thanks yet," Preston said as he reached into his vest pocket. The sun glinted off the blade of a small knife, and Nora instinctively stepped back. "Hold still," he murmured, and in one swift motion he cut through the rope binding her wrists. The sudden freedom made Nora gasp. She rubbed her raw skin, wincing at the pain. Preston tucked away his knife and, to her surprise, gently took her hands in his. His calloused fingers carefully examined the rope burns. "These need tending," he said softly. "I have some salve at the ranch." "Why did you pay so much?" Nora asked, unable to hide her suspicion. "What do you expect in return?" Preston's expression remained impassive, but his eyes softened. "I expect 6 months of honest work, Miss Patterson. Nothing more, nothing less. You'll help my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, with the cooking and cleaning. The ranch isn't large, but there's plenty to do." "And that's all." "That's all," he confirmed, releasing her hands. "I don't hold with the practice of these auctions, but I couldn't leave you to Hargrove's tender mercies. Now, shall we go? It's a fair ride to the ranch, and I'd like to reach it before dark." Nora hesitated. This man had spent an extraordinary amount to purchase her contract, yet he stood before her speaking of honest work and medical attention for her injuries. It seemed too good to be true, but what choice did she have? "Very well, Mr. Vance," she finally said, climbing onto the wagon seat he indicated. As Preston guided the horses out of town, Nora stole glances at his profile. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the western sun, with faint lines at the corners of his eyes. A neatly trimmed beard covered his jaw, and beneath his hat, she could see dark hair touched with early gray at the temples. "You're not from around here originally," Preston observed as they left the last buildings of Caldwell behind. "No," Nora admitted. "Boston. My father brought me west after my mother died. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. And instead, he struck debt." Nora winced at his directness but nodded. "He was not a practical man, Mr. Vance, always chasing the next opportunity, the next big strike. When he died this past winter, I discovered he'd borrowed heavily against our few possessions." "I'm sorry for your loss," Preston said quietly. "Losing family is never easy, regardless of their flaws." The simple kindness in his words threatened to break the composure Nora had fought so hard to maintain throughout this terrible day. She turned her face away, blinking rapidly to clear the sudden moisture in her eyes. They rode in silence for a time, the rolling hills of the Idaho countryside spreading before them. Scattered pine forests dotted the landscape, and in the distance, mountains rose blue against the sky. "It's beautiful country," Nora finally said. Preston nodded. "That it is. Harsh at times, but beautiful. My father brought our family here from Missouri when I was just a boy. Started with 20 acres and 5 cows. Now the ranch is 200 acres with a decent herd. You must be very proud of what you've built." "It's a living," he said simply. "Not as grand as Hargrove's spread, but every head of cattle is paid for and every hand gets fair wages." As they crested a hill, Preston pointed ahead. "There it is. Vance Ranch." Nora saw a modest but well-maintained collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. A 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch stood at the center, flanked by a large barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Preston's mouth curved in the barest hint of a smile. "Mrs. Abernathy will get you settled. She keeps house and cooks for me and the hands. Good woman, but she's getting on in years and could use the help." As they pulled up to the house, an older woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face, though lined with age, held warmth and intelligence. "So you went and did something foolish at the auction after all," she called to Preston. "Samuel rode ahead to tell me. $1,000, Preston Vance. Have you lost your mind entirely?" "Probably," Preston replied as he helped Nora down from the wagon. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Nora Patterson. Miss Patterson, my housekeeper, Mrs. Alina Abernathy." The older woman's sharp eyes softened as she took in Nora's disheveled appearance and the raw marks on her wrists. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside at once. You look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks." "Thank you," Nora murmured, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness after months of hardship. "Get her settled, Mrs. Abernathy," Preston said. "I need to see to the horses and check in with the men." As he turned to leave, Nora called after him, "Mr. Vance." He paused, looking back at her questioningly. "Thank you," she said simply. Preston nodded once, then strode toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Mrs. Abernathy led Nora into the house. "That man," she muttered. "Heart bigger than his sense sometimes. Come along, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed, and then we'll see to those wrists." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, swept floors. Mrs. Abernathy showed Nora to a small but pleasant bedroom on the second floor. "This will be yours," she said. "It's not much, but it's private. The washroom is at the end of the hall. We're fortunate to have indoor plumbing, thanks to Preston's forward thinking. There's a tub you can use, and I'll bring up hot water." Nora stood in the middle of the room, hardly able to believe her change in circumstances. Just hours ago, she had been standing on an auction block, certain she was headed for months of misery. Now she had a clean room and the promise of a bath. "Why did he do it?" she asked. $1,000 for a 6-month contract makes no economic sense." Mrs. Abernathy sighed. "Preston Vance has never done the sensible thing when his conscience is involved. His father was the same way. When he heard Hargrove was planning to bid on whatever merchandise came up at the auction, I suspect he couldn't stand by and do nothing." She patted Nora's arm. "Now, I'll fetch that water, and there's a dress in the wardrobe that might fit you." It belonged to Preston's sister before she married and moved to Oregon. After Mrs. Abernathy left, Nora opened the wardrobe to find a simple blue cotton dress, slightly faded but clean and well made. She ran her fingers over the fabric, thinking about the man who had rescued her. Preston Vance was clearly not what she had first assumed, not simply a wealthy rancher indulging a whim, but a man of principles, whatever his gruff exterior might suggest. The promised bath was heaven after weeks of making do with cold water and a washcloth in boarding houses. By the time Nora dressed in the borrowed clothes and made her way downstairs, she felt almost human again. She found Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, stirring something that smelled delicious on the large cast iron stove. "There you are," the older woman said approvingly. "You clean up nicely, Miss Patterson. Sit down and have some stew. The men eat in the bunkhouse, so it's just us for dinner. Preston sometimes joins us, but he's likely to be busy with the cattle tonight. Please call me Nora," she said, taking the offered seat at the kitchen table. "Nora, then. And I'm Alina, though most just call me Mrs. Abernathy out of habit." She placed a steaming bowl of beef stew in front of Nora, along with a thick slice of fresh bread. "Eat up. You look half-starved." Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. She ate with as much decorum as she could muster, though she wanted nothing more than to devour the meal in undignified haste. "Mrs. Abernathy Aliner, what will be expected of me here?" she asked between bites. "Nothing unreasonable," Aliner assured her. "Helping with the cooking and cleaning, mending, perhaps tending the kitchen garden. Preston runs a tight ship, but he's fair. He expects honest work but doesn't demand more than a person can give." "And he paid $1,000 for that?" Aliner's eyes twinkled. "I suspect he'd say he was paying to keep you from Hargrove, not for your labor. Augustus Hargrove has a nasty reputation with women in his employ. 3 have run away in the past year, despite the legal consequences. One nearly died crossing the mountains in winter to escape him." Nora shuddered. "Then I'm even more in Mr. Vance's debt than I realized." "Preston doesn't see it that way," Aliner said firmly. "He'd say he was just doing what any decent man would do." "There weren't many other decent men at that auction then," Nora observed dryly. Aliner sighed. "No, there weren't. That's the way of things out here sometimes. The law is thin and justice thinner. But there are good people too. Preston's one of them, for all his growling and solitary ways." Later that night, as Nora lay in the unfamiliar but comfortable bed, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. From Boston society to frontier tragedy, from auction block to this peaceful ranch. Preston Vance remained an enigma, the gruff rancher with unexpected principles who had cut her bonds and held her injured hands with surprising gentleness. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful. For the first time in months, Nora slept without fear. The following morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the simple curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly in the borrowed blue dress and made her way downstairs. She found the kitchen empty, but a pot of coffee still warm on the stove. Through the window, she could see activity in the yard, men moving between the barn and corral, the distant figures of riders heading out to the pastures. The back door opened and Preston entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He stopped short when he saw Nora. "Good morning, Miss Patterson," he said, his deep voice formal. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied. "And please call me Nora," he nodded. "Nora, then." "Mrs. Abernathy has gone to town for supplies. She left a list of tasks for you on the table there." Nora picked up the paper. The handwriting was neat and the requests reasonable: bread to be baked, floors to be swept, linens to be washed. "This all seems straightforward enough," she said. "I'm no expert cook, but I can manage bread and basic meals. Mrs. Abernathy said you'd likely need instruction on using the wood stove. It can be temperamental. I'm a quick learner." Preston studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have some salve for your wrists." "Sit down." Nora hesitated but took a seat at the kitchen table. Preston retrieved a small tin from a cupboard and pulled a chair close to hers. He opened the tin to reveal a greenish ointment that smelled of herbs. "Your wrists still look painful," he observed, taking her right hand in his. The touch was impersonal but gentle as he carefully applied the salve to the rope burns. "It's better today," Nora said, acutely aware of his calloused fingers against her skin. The bath and rest helped. Preston worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. Up close, Nora could see flecks of gold in his hazel eyes and a thin scar that ran along his jawline beneath his beard. "How did you get that scar?" she asked impulsively. His hands paused momentarily. "Bar fight in boys, long time ago. You don't seem the type for bar fights." A hint of amusement crossed his face. Everyone's the type for bar fights under the right circumstances, Miss Nora. And what were your circumstances? A man was speaking poorly of a lady, he said simply, finishing with her right wrist and moving to the left. I objected. He objected to my objection. I assume you won the disagreement, eventually. His eyes met hers briefly. I was younger then, more prone to solving problems with my fists, and now I try to solve them with common sense. He finished applying the salve and released her hand. Though some would say paying $1,000 for a 6-month labor contract suggests I haven't improved much in the wisdom department. Nora flexed her wrists, feeling the soothing effect of the ointment. I'm curious about that myself, Mrs. Abernathy suggested it was to keep me from Mr. Hargrove. Partly, Preston acknowledged, replacing the lid on the tin. Hargrove's treatment of women in his employ is not something I could stand by and allow if I had the means to prevent it. And the other part. Preston stood, returning the tin to the cupboard. The other part is my business, Miss Patterson. The formality was back, and Nora realized she had pushed too far. This man had saved her from a terrible fate, but that didn't entitle her to his private thoughts. Of course, she said quickly. Forgive my impertinence. Preston's expression softened slightly. There's nothing to forgive. You have every right to question your situation. He reached for his hat. I'll be working with the North Herd today. Lunch for the hands is usually at noon. Mrs. Abernathy should be back by then. But if not, there's stew left from last night that can be reheated. With that, he was gone, leaving Nora to contemplate the complex man who now controlled her immediate future. She turned to the list Mrs. Abernathy had left and set to work. The morning passed quickly as she familiarized herself with the kitchen, tackled the bread making, and began the laundry. The work was honest and straightforward, so different from the uncertainties of the past months. Around mid-morning, as Nora was hanging sheets on the line behind the house, a rider approached from the direction of town. She shaded her eyes, watching as the figure drew closer, eventually recognizing Mrs. Abernathy's erect posture atop a steady brown mare. You've made good progress, the older woman called approvingly as she dismounted, tying her horse to the hitching post. The bread, rising by the stove, Nora replied, helping Alina unload packages from the saddlebags. Excellent. And how are you finding things so far? Everything is fine. Mr. Vance provided some salve for my wrists before he left for the north pasture. Alina's eyebrows rose slightly. Did he now? Interesting. Why interesting? Preston isn't one for personal ministrations, the older woman said, carrying packages toward the house. He leaves nursing to me or Doc Wilson when necessary. Nora followed with the remaining parcels. He seemed concerned. As I said, interesting. Alina set her burdens on the kitchen table and began unwrapping them. I brought you some things from town. Nothing fancy, but you'll need more than just that one dress. Inside the packages were 2 more dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, and a pair of sturdy boots. Nora touched the items with disbelief. But these must have cost. Preston left money with explicit instructions. Alina interrupted. Said you'd need proper clothes and couldn't be expected to work in borrowed things that don't fit right. Nora felt her cheeks warm. That's very thoughtful. He can be when he remembers there's a world beyond his cattle, Alina said dryly. Now, let's check that bread and get lunch started. The men will be hungry, and Preston in particular gets cross when meals are late. As they worked together in the kitchen, Alina told Nora more about the ranch and its operations. Preston had inherited the place from his father 10 years earlier and had steadily expanded it, focusing on quality breeding stock rather than sheer numbers. He employed 4 permanent hands and hired extras during roundup and branding. What about his family? Nora asked as she sliced freshly baked bread. You mentioned a sister in Oregon, Priscilla. Yes. Married a shopkeeper in Portland 5 years ago. Their mother died when Preston was 18 consumption, and their father raised them alone until his heart gave out. Preston was 28 then, already running most of the ranch operations anyway. No wife? Nora asked, then immediately felt forward for asking. Eleanor gave her a knowing look. There was a girl once before I came to work here, Margaret something or other, daughter of a banker in Boise. The story goes she agreed to marry Preston, then changed her mind when a better prospect appeared. Ran off with some mining investor heading to California. That's terrible. Men have survived worse heartbreaks, Eleanor said matter-of-factly, but Preston's kept mostly to himself since then. Focuses on the ranch. Some in town think he's become a hermit, but he's just particular about his company. The sound of men's voices outside announced the arrival of the ranch hands for lunch. They filtered into the kitchen in twos, and threes, 4 men ranging in age from a youngster, barely out of his teens, to a weathered older man with a pronounced limp. Eleanor made the introductions. Samuel Wilson, the blacksmith Nora had seen in town, who apparently split his time between his shop in Caldwell and the ranch. Joshua Cooper, the oldest at around 60, who served as foreman. Young Timothy Hayes, who couldn't quite meet Nora's eyes without blushing. And Diego Mendez, a skilled horseman from a prominent California ranching family who had come north seeking his own path. Preston was the last to enter, ducking his tall frame through the doorway. His eyes found Nora immediately, noting the new dress she wore, but he made no comment as he took his place at the head of the table. The meal was simple but hearty stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that Eleanor had purchased in town. The conversation flowed easily among the men, discussing cattle, the weather, and local news. Nora remained quiet, observing the dynamics. Preston spoke little but was clearly respected by his men, who frequently looked to him for confirmation or decisions. After lunch, the men returned to their work, and Nora helped Eleanor clean up the kitchen. You did well, the older woman remarked. The bread was excellent for a first attempt with that temperamental oven. Thank you, Nora said. It's been a long time since I've baked, not since Boston, really. You mentioned your father brought you west after your mother died. How long ago was that? 3 years. I was 19 when we left Boston. Father had investments that failed and there was talk of arrest for unpaid debts. Nora's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. He promised we'd make a fresh start, said the West was full of opportunities for a man with vision. And was it? Not for him. He went from one failed scheme to another. Silver mining, then a saloon partnership that dissolved within months, then some land speculation that came to nothing. Each time he'd borrow more, certain the next venture would be the one to make our fortune. Eleanor's eyes were sympathetic. A dreamer. Yes, Nora resumed her work. When the pneumonia took him this winter, I discovered he'd mortgaged everything we had left, including, apparently, my labor if necessary. The bank was quite clear about their legal rights in the matter. The law can be a cold comfort sometimes, Eleanor murmured. But you're here now, and Preston's contract is a far sight better than what might have been. I know. I'm grateful, truly. Nora hesitated. But I can't help wondering about his motivations. $1,000 is an extraordinary sum for 6 months of housekeeping. Preston has his reasons, Eleanor said. And they're for him to share or not, as he chooses. All I'll say is that he's a man who understands what it means to be at the mercy of circumstances beyond your control. The afternoon passed quickly with more household tasks. By evening, Nora was tired but satisfied with her accomplishments. She and Eleanor prepared dinner for the household: roast beef, potatoes, and early summer vegetables from the kitchen garden. Again, the men ate together, though the conversation was more subdued as fatigue from the day's work set in. Preston remained quiet, but Nora caught him watching her several times during the meal, his expression unreadable. After dinner, while the hands retired to the bunkhouse, Preston lingered at the table, a ledger open before him as he recorded the day's activities. Nora and Alina cleaned the kitchen, working in comfortable silence. When Alina excused herself to rest, these old bones need more recovery time than they used to. Nora found herself alone with Preston for the first time since morning. He looked up from his ledger as she wiped down the last of the counters. "You've settled in quickly." "The work is straightforward enough," she replied, "and Mrs. Abernathy is an excellent teacher." Preston nodded, his pen poised over the page. "The new clothes fit well." "Yes, thank you." "It was very thoughtful." "It was practical," he corrected, returning his attention to the ledger. "You needed proper work clothes." Nora dried her hands on her apron, studying him. In the lamplight, with his guard slightly lowered by the day's exertions, he looked younger somehow. Less the formidable rancher and more a man with his own burdens. "Mr. Vance, Preston," he interrupted, not looking up. "Preston," she amended. "I want you to know that I understand the magnitude of what you did yesterday. $1,000 it's a fortune to someone like me." He set down his pen and met her gaze directly. "It's a significant sum to me as well, Miss Patterson. I'm not a wealthy man by any stretch." "Then why?" Preston was silent for a long moment. "Because some things matter more than money," he finally said. "Because I saw a woman being treated as property when she deserved to be treated as a person. Because I have the means, however limited, to right a wrong when I see it." His voice grew quieter. "And because I know what it is to be at the mercy of others who hold your future in their hands." Before Nora could respond, he closed his ledger decisively. "It's been a long day. You should rest. Tomorrow will bring its own work." It was a dismissal, gentle but firm. Nora recognized that whatever window into his thoughts had briefly opened was now closed again. "Good night, then," she said softly, "and thank you again, Preston." His name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate somehow despite its formality. He nodded once, his eyes holding hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Good night, Nora." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Nora found herself reflecting on the complex man whose roof now sheltered her. Preston Vance was not at all what she had initially assumed, neither the impulsive do-gooder nor the calculating businessman. He was something else entirely. A man guided by principles that seemed to run deeper than the conventional morality of the town, or the pragmatism of frontier survival. And despite her best intentions to maintain emotional distance during her time of servitude, Nora found herself increasingly curious about the quiet rancher with the unexpected depth. The following weeks established a rhythm to life on the Vance ranch. Nora rose early each day to help Alina prepare breakfast for the household. Mornings were filled with baking, cleaning, and laundry, while afternoons might include mending, preserving fruits and vegetables from the kitchen garden, or other household tasks. Preston was often absent during daylight hours, working with his men on the endless tasks that kept a cattle ranch functioning, mending fences, moving herds to fresh pasture, treating sick animals, and the myriad other responsibilities of a rancher. When their paths did cross, their interactions remained cordial but brief, as if both were cautious about venturing beyond the safety of their established roles. Yet Nora began to notice small changes. Preston would sometimes bring wildflowers he'd picked on the range, ostensibly for the table, but delivered to the kitchen when Nora was working there alone. He started taking his evening coffee on the porch after dinner, at just the time when Nora had developed the habit of stepping outside for fresh air before bed. These moments, brief though they were, gradually became less strained. They would talk of simple things: the weather, the progress of the garden, news from town. Occasionally, Preston would share stories of his early days on the ranch or ask Nora about her life in Boston. One evening in late June, about a month after Nora's arrival, she found Preston already on the porch when she stepped outside. He stood at the railing, looking out at the mountains gilded by the setting sun. "It's beautiful here," Nora said, coming to stand beside him. "I never imagined Idaho would have such lovely landscapes." "Most people don't," Preston replied. "They think of it as just wilderness to be passed through on the way to Oregon or California, but it has its own kind of beauty." "Is that why you stayed, when your sister went to Oregon?" Preston considered the question. "Partly. This land gets in your blood after a while, but mostly this was my father's dream. He built something here from nothing. I couldn't walk away from that. You honor his memory by continuing his work." "I try to." He glanced at her. "What about you? What were your dreams before circumstances intervened?" The question caught Nora off guard. No one had asked about her hopes in a very long time. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted. "In Boston, I had nearly completed my training at a women's college when Mother fell ill. After her death and our financial troubles, that path closed to me." "You're well educated then." "Reasonably so. Father believed in education for women, whatever his other failings." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "We could use a proper school in Caldwell. The closest one is 20 miles away in Boise, and most families can't spare their children for the journey." "Are there many children in the area?" "Enough. Ranching families, farmers, shopkeepers' kids. Most get by with whatever schooling their parents can provide, which isn't much in many cases." Nora felt a spark of interest. "It's a shame. Education changes everything for a child." "Indeed." Preston turned to face her fully. "You know, your contract with me specifies domestic work, but there's nothing that says you couldn't use your other skills during your time here. If teaching is your calling, perhaps we could arrange something." "Are you serious?" Nora couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. "I don't make offers I don't mean," Preston said. "It would take some organizing, finding a suitable location, notifying families. But if you're interested—" "I am," Nora said quickly. "Very much so." Something like a smile ghosted across Preston's face. "Then we'll speak to Reverend Thompson next time we're in town. The church might serve as a schoolroom, at least temporarily." "Thank you," Nora said, impulsively touching his arm. "This means more than I can express." Preston looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and for a moment Nora thought she'd overstepped. But then he covered her fingers with his own, the touch brief but warm. "Everyone deserves the chance to use their God-given talents, Nora. Even in difficult circumstances." The moment hung between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Preston cleared his throat and stepped back. "It's getting late," he said, "and tomorrow's an early start. The cattle buyer from Boise is coming to look at this year's calves." "Of course," Nora said, suddenly self-conscious. "Good night, Preston." "Good night, Nora." As she lay in bed that night, Nora found her thoughts returning to the brief touch they had shared, and the look in Preston's eyes when he'd covered her hand with his. There had been something there beyond the relationship of employer and servant, something that both thrilled and frightened her. She was in no position to develop feelings for anyone, least of all the man who legally held her contract. In 5 months, she would be free again, free to leave Caldwell, free to pursue her own path. Becoming attached to Preston Vance would only complicate an already complex situation. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, Nora couldn't help but wonder if perhaps complications were already developing, whether she wished them to or not. The following Sunday, Preston drove Nora and Alina into Caldwell for church services. It was Nora's first return to town since the auction, and she felt a flutter of anxiety as they approached the outskirts. "No one will say anything," Preston assured her, seeming to sense her discomfort. "Labor contracts are common enough." "It's not that," Nora admitted. "It's just, the last time I was here wasn't exactly a proud moment." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Preston said firmly. "You were caught in circumstances beyond your control." Alina nodded in agreement from Nora's other side on the wagon seat. "Preston's right, dear. Hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." The church was a simple white-painted building at the edge of town. As they arrived, other wagons and riders were already gathering in the yard. Nora recognized some faces from the auction, though most were strangers to her. Preston helped both women down from the wagon with careful courtesy. As they walked toward the church steps, Nora was acutely aware of curious glances directed their way. "Vance," called a booming voice. "Twice in 1 month you grace us with your presence. The Reverend will think the second coming is upon us." The speaker was a barrel-chested man with a shock of white hair and twinkling blue eyes. Preston's usually stoic expression softened slightly. "Judge Hollister," he said, extending his hand. "Just fulfilling my Christian duty. And bringing the ladies to civilization for a change." The judge turned his attention to Nora. "You must be Miss Patterson. I've heard about you. I'm Ezekiel Hollister, circuit judge for this district." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Honor," Nora replied. "None of that Your Honor business on the Lord's Day," he said with a wink. "Save it for when I'm on the bench." He lowered his voice. "I'm glad to see you settled at Vance's place. That auction business is a disgrace, though technically legal. I've been trying to get the territorial legislature to reform the debt laws for years." Nora was surprised by his candor. "You oppose the labor auctions." "Oppose them? I consider them one step removed from slavery, young lady. Debt should never cost a person their freedom, however temporarily." He glanced at Preston. "Your employer is one of the few who agrees with me on that score." "The judge is being generous," Preston said. "I still participate in the system when it suits my needs." "You participate to keep good people from falling into the hands of men like Hargrove," the judge retorted. "Speaking of whom?" He nodded toward a figure approaching from across the churchyard. Augustus Hargrove moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference, his expensive clothes and gold watch chain marking him as prosperous even among the Sunday best of the congregation. "Vance," he said coldly as he drew near. "Judge." His gaze slid to Nora, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Patterson, I see Vance is making the most of his investment." "Mr. Hargrove," Nora acknowledged stiffly. Preston stepped subtly closer to Nora's side. "We're here for worship, Hargrove, nothing more." "Of course," Hargrove said with a thin smile. "Though I must say, Vance, if you ever find yourself regretting your extravagance, I'd still be willing to take the contract off your hands. For a reasonable price, naturally." Before Preston could respond, the church bell began to ring, signaling the start of services. "Shall we?" Alina said firmly, taking Nora's arm. "We don't want to keep the Reverend waiting." Inside, the church was simple but well-maintained, with wooden pews and plain glass windows. Preston guided Nora and Alina to a pew near the back, placing himself between Nora and the aisle where Hargrove would pass. The service was familiar enough: hymns, prayers, scripture readings, and a sermon on the Good Samaritan that seemed particularly pointed given recent events. Throughout, Nora was conscious of Preston beside her, his deep voice joining in the hymns, his tall frame relaxed yet somehow protective. After the service, Preston introduced Nora to Reverend Thompson, a thin, earnest man in his 40s. Nora was trained as a teacher back east, Preston explained. We've been discussing the possibility of starting a small school for the children in the area. The Reverend's face lit up. What a wonderful idea. We've needed a proper teacher for years. The church would be available during the week, of course. It would only be temporary, Nora hastened to add, conscious of her contract situation. I'm only here for another 5 months. 5 months of education is better than none, Reverend Thompson said firmly, and who knows? Perhaps arrangements could be made for a more permanent position if things work out well. As they continued to discuss logistics, Nora noticed Preston watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that the future held possibilities neither had considered before. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. It was only as they turned onto the long drive leading to the ranch house that Preston broke the silence. Reverend Thompson seems enthusiastic about the school idea. Yes, Nora agreed. He suggested we could start as early as next week if we can notify enough families. I'll have the hands spread the word, Preston said. Samuel can take notices to the neighboring ranches when he makes his rounds. Thank you, Nora said sincerely. I know this isn't part of our original agreement. Preston's eyes remained on the road ahead. Our agreement was for your labor. Teaching is labor, valuable labor. If anything, I'm getting the better end of the bargain. Alina chuckled from Nora's other side. Listen to him, pretending it's all business, as if he hasn't been talking about the need for a school for years. Preston shot her a look that might have been irritation on another man, but on him seemed almost sheepish. The community benefits, that's what matters. Of course it is, Alina said with a knowing smile at Nora. By the following Sunday, word of the new school had spread throughout the area. Nora found herself surrounded by curious mothers and excited children after church services, all eager to know when classes would begin and what would be taught. We'll start with reading, writing, and arithmetic, she explained to Mrs. Wilson, the blacksmith's wife. As the students progress, we can add history, geography, and natural philosophy. Sounds mighty fancy, observed a weather-beaten rancher with 3 young children clustered around his legs. But I reckon my young'uns could use some book learning. Can't all be cowhands forever. Exactly, Mr. Foster, Nora agreed. Education opens doors to many possibilities. As the crowd dispersed, Nora found herself face to face with Augustus Hargrove and a young woman who clung to his arm with a proprietary air. Miss Patterson, Hargrove said with a cold smile. Playing the schoolmarm now, I see. Vance must be more generous with his indentured servants than I would be. The woman beside him tittered. Really, Augustus, you mustn't call her that. Employee is the polite term, isn't it? Nora forced herself to remain composed. Mr. Hargrove. I don't believe we've been introduced, miss. Mrs. Hargrove, actually, the woman corrected with obvious satisfaction. Vivian Hargrove. Augustus and I were married last month in Boise. Congratulations, Nora said politely. Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thank you. Vivian's father is a banking associate of mine. A very advantageous connection. His gaze slid past Nora to where Preston was speaking with Judge Hollister. Though I must say, watching Vance parade you around town makes me wonder if he has similar plans. Contract wives are becoming quite the fashion, I hear. Augustus, Vivian gasped, though her scandalized tone was belied by the gleam of malicious interest in her eyes. Nora felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. My relationship with Mr. Vance is strictly professional, Mrs. Hargrove, and if you'll excuse me, I should join him and Mrs. Abernathy. We have a long ride home." As she turned to leave, Hargrove caught her arm. "Just remember, Miss Patterson, when your contract expires, you'll need new employment. My offer stands. I could always use another household manager." Preston appeared at Nora's side as if summoned by some sixth sense. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. Hargrove released Nora's arm immediately. "Not at all. Just exchanging pleasantries with the town's new teacher." "Then you won't mind if we take our leave," Preston said, offering Nora his arm. "We have preparations to make for tomorrow's classes." As they walked away, Nora could feel Hargrove's eyes on her back. "Thank you," she murmured. He was being unpleasant. "Hargrove doesn't know any other way to be," Preston replied, his jaw tight. "What did he say to upset you?" Nora hesitated, unwilling to repeat the insinuations. "Nothing worth repeating, just trying to make me uncomfortable." Preston studied her face. "If he ever makes you feel unsafe, I need to know immediately. Understand?" The protective edge in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Nora. "I understand, but I can handle men like Augustus Hargrove." "I don't doubt it," Preston said, his expression softening slightly. "But you shouldn't have to handle them alone." The school opened the following day with 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 15. Nora quickly established routines and assessed her pupils' varying levels of knowledge. Some could barely recognize letters, while others had a solid foundation from parents or previous schooling in the East. Preston arranged for her to be driven to town each morning and picked up after classes ended at 3. Often, he would come himself, timing his business in Caldwell to coincide with the end of the school day. One afternoon in mid-July, after a particularly challenging day with her students, Nora emerged from the church to find Preston waiting with the wagon. "Difficult day?" he asked, noting her weary expression as he helped her up to the seat. "Challenging," she admitted. Young Billy Foster decided to put a garter snake in Mary Wilson's desk. The resulting chaos set us back an entire arithmetic lesson. Preston's mouth twitched. "Sounds like something I might have done at that age." "Somehow that doesn't surprise me," Nora said with a smile. "Were you a troublemaker, Mr. Vance?" "The worst, according to my father. Though Priscilla was no angel either, for all her ladylike ways now." As they drove through town, Preston slowed the wagon. "I have a proposal," he said. "The students need books if they are to progress properly. I thought we might visit the general store and see what Mr. Jenkins has available." Nora brightened at the suggestion. "That would be wonderful. I've been making do with the few books families have provided, but it's not nearly enough." The general store was a large establishment that seemed to stock everything from farm implements to fabric. Mr. Jenkins, a round man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Vance, Miss Patterson, what can I do for you today?" "We're looking for schoolbooks," Preston explained. "Readers, arithmetic texts, perhaps some history volumes if you have them." Mr. Jenkins rubbed his hands together. "As a matter of fact, I received a shipment from St. Louis just last week. Follow me." He led them to a corner where several shelves held a modest selection of books. Nora eagerly examined the offerings, selecting McGuffey readers, basic arithmetic texts, a geography, and several volumes of history and natural science. "These would be perfect," she said, looking up at Preston, "but they're quite expensive." "Add them to my account, Jenkins," Preston said decisively, "and order more of whatever Miss Patterson recommends for the next shipment." "Are you certain?" Nora asked quietly. "This is a significant expense." Preston's eyes held her steadily. "Education is an investment in the future, Nora. These children deserve the best start we can give them." Something in his gaze made Nora's heart beat faster. There it was again, that connection that seemed to be growing between them, despite all the reasons it shouldn't. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Will there be anything else today? We just got in some lovely ribbon that might interest you, Miss Patterson. Actually, Preston said, I believe Miss Patterson could use some new teaching clothes, something practical but befitting her position. Before Nora could protest, he guided her toward the dry goods section where Mrs. Jenkins, a small woman with quick movements, presided over bolts of fabric and ready-made garments. An hour later, they left the store with books, 2 new dresses, a smart shawl, and various other items Preston had insisted on purchasing despite Nora's protests. You're being far too generous, she said as he loaded their purchases into the wagon. I can't possibly repay all this. It's not about repayment, Preston said, helping her onto the seat. Consider it an investment in Caldwell's education, even the dresses and ribbons. A hint of color touched Preston's tanned cheeks. A teacher should look the part. It lends authority. Nora couldn't help but laugh. Is that so? And I suppose the blue ribbon exactly matching my eyes was also for professional authority. Preston's mouth quirked in a rare, full smile. You caught me. Perhaps I wanted to see you in something besides Mrs. Abernathy's practical browns and grays. The frank admission surprised them both. Preston cleared his throat and turned his attention to the horses, while Nora felt warmth spread across her face. The ride home was quieter, but the silence was comfortable rather than strained. As they passed the outskirts of town, Preston slowed the wagon. There's a place I'd like to show you if you're not too tired, he said. It's not far off the main road. Curiosity piqued, Nora nodded. I'd like that. Preston turned the wagon onto a smaller track that wound through a stand of pines. After about half a mile, the trees opened to reveal a small, clear lake nestled at the base of a hillside. The late afternoon sun turned the water to gold, and wildflowers dotted the grassy shore. It's beautiful, Nora breathed as Preston halted the horses. My father brought me here when I was a boy, Preston said, helping her down from the wagon. Said it was where he proposed to my mother. They had a picnic by the water and he asked her to be his wife right where we're standing. Nora looked up at him, struck by the personal nature of the revelation. Thank you for sharing this place with me. It clearly means a great deal to you. Preston gazed out over the water, his expression softening with memory. I come here sometimes when decisions need making. It helps clear my mind. And what decisions are troubling you now? Nora asked gently. He turned to her then, his eyes searching her face. Not troubling exactly, just complex. Something in his tone made Nora's pulse quicken. They stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. Preston, she said softly, uncertain what she even wanted to say. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Nora found herself leaning into the touch. This is a complication neither of us needs, he murmured, his voice rough. Yes, she agreed, even as she stepped closer to him. A terrible complication. Preston's hand cupped her cheek fully now. You'll be free in 4 months, free to go wherever you choose, build whatever life you want. I know. And I have no right to ask you to consider any other future. Not while I hold your contract. Nora covered his hand with her own. What if I'm already considering other futures? Futures I never imagined when I arrived in Caldwell. For a long moment, they stood frozen in possibility, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Preston stepped back, though his eyes never left hers. 4 months, he said quietly. When your contract ends, if you still feel, whatever this is between us, then we can talk about futures. But until then, I won't take advantage of your position. Nora understood his reasoning, respected his principles, even as frustration coursed through her. "And if I disagree with your noble stance," a smile touched Preston's lips, "then I'd say you're as stubborn as I am, Miss Patterson, but my mind is made up on this." She sighed, recognizing the resolve in his expression. "Very well, Mr. Vance. We'll revisit this conversation in 4 months. Thank you." He offered his arm to escort her back to the wagon. "Though I reserve the right to continue purchasing blue ribbons that match your eyes in the meantime." Nora laughed despite herself. "I suppose I can allow that much." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Nora thought about the man beside her and the unexpected turn her life had taken. 4 months suddenly seemed both an eternity and not nearly enough time to decide what she truly wanted for her future. Summer progressed into August, bringing scorching days and the bustle of harvest preparations. The school continued to thrive, with 3 more students joining as word spread of Nora's teaching abilities. On the ranch, every hand was busy with the hay cutting and storing that would see the cattle through the winter. Nora's days fell into a pleasant rhythm teaching during the week, helping Alina with household tasks in the evenings and on weekends. Her relationship with Preston remained cordial but carefully circumscribed, both of them honoring the boundary he had established at the lake. Yet there were moments a lingering glance across the dinner table, his hand steadying her as she stepped down from the wagon. The books on poetry and science that began appearing on her bedside table that spoke of feelings running deeper than either would openly acknowledge. One Saturday in late August, Preston announced at breakfast that they would all be attending a gathering at Judge Hollister's ranch that evening. "A gathering?" Nora asked, surprised. "What kind of gathering?" "The judge hosts a summer social every year," Alina explained. "Dancing, food, music. It's quite the event for the county. Everyone of note will be there," Preston added, "including several families from your school. The judge specifically requested your presence." "But I have nothing suitable to wear to such an occasion," Nora protested. Preston and Alina exchanged a glance. "Actually," Alina said with a smile, "we may have anticipated that concern." She left the kitchen and returned moments later with a large box tied with string. "This arrived with the supplies yesterday. Preston thought you might need it." Nora opened the package to find a beautiful dress of deep blue silk, far finer than anything she had worn since leaving Boston. Beneath it lay matching shoes, gloves, and a delicate shawl. "This is too much," she said, looking up at Preston in astonishment. "Far too extravagant for a respected teacher and member of this household," Preston finished firmly. "The judge's gatherings are formal affairs. You should be dressed appropriately." "Thank you," Nora said softly, touching the fine fabric. "It's beautiful." Preston nodded, a hint of color touching his cheekbones above his beard. "Alina helped with the selection. I merely provided the funds." "And specific instructions about the color," Alina added with a knowing smile. "Something about matching certain eyes, if I recall correctly." Preston cleared his throat. "Yes, well, we'll leave at 6 this evening. The drive to the judge's ranch takes about an hour." As he strode from the kitchen, Nora caught Alina's eye and they both burst into laughter. "That man," Alina said, shaking her head fondly. "For someone so direct about most things, he certainly takes a roundabout approach to matters of the heart. We've agreed to wait until my contract ends before discussing personal matters," Nora explained. "Ah, that explains it. Preston and his principles." Alina patted Nora's hand. "Well, principles are all very fine, but there's no rule against looking your best in the meantime. Let's see about doing something special with your hair for tonight." By the time they departed for the judge's ranch, Nora hardly recognized herself. Alina had arranged her hair in an elegant style, with soft curls framing her face and the rest swept up with pearl-tipped pins borrowed from Alina's own treasured collection. The blue dress fit perfectly, enhancing her figure without being improper, and the matching shoes and gloves completed the transformation. When she descended the stairs, Preston was waiting in the front hallway. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and went completely still, his eyes widening as he took in her appearance. "You look," he began, then seemed to lose his train of thought. "Presentable," Nora suggested with a small smile. "Beautiful," he finished quietly. "Absolutely beautiful." The simple honesty in his voice brought warmth to Nora's cheeks. "Thank you, and thank you again for the dress. It's finer than anything I've owned in years." "It suits you," Preston said, offering his arm. "Shall we? Alina is already in the wagon." The judge's ranch was larger than Preston's, with a sprawling main house surrounded by well-kept grounds. As they approached, Nora could see lanterns illuminating a wide veranda and hear the sound of fiddle music drifting through the evening air. "Nervous?" Preston asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "A little," Nora admitted. "It's been a long time since I attended any kind of social function." "You'll be fine," he assured her. "Just remember you're the woman who faces down 12 unruly children every day. A few ranchers and merchants should present no challenge at all." His attempt at humor worked, and Nora felt herself relax slightly. "When you put it that way, I suppose I am rather formidable." Judge Hollister met them at the entrance, resplendent in a formal suit that seemed at odds with his usual jovial demeanor. "Vance, Miss Patterson, Mrs. Abernathy, welcome, welcome. Come in, the festivities are well underway." The interior of the house had been transformed for the occasion. Furniture had been moved aside to create a dance floor in the large main room, where couples were already whirling to the music of a small band in the corner. Tables laden with food and drink lined the walls, and everywhere were people in their finest attire, talking, laughing, and enjoying the rare opportunity for socializing. "Quite the gathering," Preston observed, his hand warm at the small of Nora's back as he guided her through the crowd. "The judge spares no expense for his annual social," Alina explained. "It's a tradition going back 20 years or more." As they made their way further into the room, Nora saw many familiar faces, parents of her students, shopkeepers from town, neighboring ranchers. To her dismay, she also spotted Augustus Hargrove and his young wife holding court in one corner, surrounded by what appeared to be business associates. Preston followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "Ignore him," he advised quietly. "This is your evening to enjoy." Before Nora could respond, they were approached by Reverend Thompson and his wife, a plump, pleasant woman who immediately engaged Nora in conversation about the school. "You've worked wonders with those children," Mrs. Thompson enthused. "My nephew Billy actually asked for a book last week." "A book?" "The same child who once declared he'd rather eat worms than read," Nora laughed. "Billy has a quick mind when something captures his interest. We've been studying natural sciences, and he's particularly fascinated by geology." As the conversation continued, more parents joined the group, each eager to share stories of their children's progress. Preston stood quietly at Nora's side, saying little but watching her with evident pride as she discussed her teaching methods and plans for the coming months. When the current dance ended, the fiddler announced a waltz would follow. Preston turned to Nora. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked formally. Nora hesitated only briefly. "I'd be delighted, though I warn you it's been some time since I've danced." "I'll risk it," Preston said with a smile, leading her to the dance floor. As the music began, he placed one hand at her waist, took her gloved hand in his, and guided her into the steps of the waltz. After a moment's awkwardness, muscle memory took over, and Nora found herself moving easily in time with the music and Preston's sure lead. "You dance very well for a rancher," she observed. "My mother insisted on lessons," Preston admitted. "Said no son of hers would clump around a dance floor like a bear with sore paws." "A wise woman, your mother." "She was," he agreed, his expression softening with memory. "She would have liked you, I think." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, and Nora felt her heart quicken. "I'm sure I would have liked her as well." They continued dancing, their steps perfectly matched as they moved among the other couples. Nora was acutely aware of Preston's hand at her waist, the warmth of his palm against hers, the way his eyes never left her face. For those few minutes, the complications of their situation, her contract, her uncertain future, the propriety of their growing feelings seemed to fade away. There was only the music, the movement, and the connection between them that grew stronger with each passing day. When the dance ended, Preston reluctantly released her, though he kept her hand on his arm as they made their way to the refreshment table. "You two make quite the handsome couple," observed Judge Hollister, appearing beside them with 2 glasses of punch. "Best dancers on the floor by far." "The judge is being kind," Nora demurred, accepting the offered drink. "I'm sadly out of practice." "Nonsense. Grace is grace, Miss Patterson, whether recently acquired or long established." The judge turned to Preston. "I've been meaning to speak with you about that business with the water rights on your eastern boundary. Do you mind if I steal a moment?" Preston glanced at Nora. "Would you excuse us briefly?" "Of course," she assured him. "I see several of my students' mothers I should greet anyway." As the men moved away, Nora found herself approached by Vivian Hargrove, who had detached herself from her husband's group. "Miss Patterson," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "What a lovely dress, almost fashionable even by Eastern standards." "Mrs. Hargrove," Nora acknowledged coolly. "You're looking well." "Marriage agrees with me," Vivian replied, glancing toward her husband. "Augustus is a very generous provider." "I'm sure he is." Vivian leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I must say you've accomplished quite a feat. Everyone is talking about how you've managed to wrap Preston Vance around your finger. The man hasn't attended a social function in years, yet here he is, dancing and smiling like a schoolboy." Nora stiffened. "Mr. Vance and I have a professional relationship. He's my employer, nothing more." "Of course," Vivian said with a knowing smirk. "That's why he outbid my husband by $500 at the auction, for a professional relationship." "Mrs. Hargrove, I don't know what you're implying." "Oh, I'm not implying anything, dear. I'm stating quite plainly that you found a clever way to secure your future. Contract bride or not, you've clearly set your sights on becoming the next Mrs. Vance." Anger flared in Nora's chest. "You're mistaken, Mrs. Hargrove, and I'd thank you to keep such baseless speculations to yourself." "Baseless?" Vivian laughed lightly. "My dear, he can't take his eyes off you, and the way you look at him. Well, it's quite obvious to anyone paying attention. I only wonder what will happen when your contract ends and he no longer has legal claim to your services." Before Nora could respond, Preston reappeared at her side. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his expression darkening as he noted Nora's flushed face. "Perfectly fine," Vivian assured him with a bright smile. "Miss Patterson and I were just getting better acquainted. If you'll excuse me, I should return to my husband." As she glided away, Preston turned to Nora with concern. "What did she say to upset you?" "Nothing worth repeating," Nora said, echoing her words from their previous encounter with the Hargroves. "Just unpleasant insinuations." Preston's jaw tightened. "About us?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze following Vivian back to her husband's side. "People will talk," he finally said. "It's the nature of small communities. The question is whether we let their talk dictate our actions. And what are our actions, Preston? Nora asked softly. We dance around each other quite literally tonight, but we've agreed not to speak of what lies between us until my contract ends. Meanwhile, others are drawing their own conclusions. Preston looked down at her, his expression troubled. Would you prefer we maintain more distance? No, Nora said immediately, surprising herself with her vehemence. No, that's not what I want at all. Relief flickered in his eyes. Good, because I'm not sure I could abide by such a request even if propriety demands it. The naked honesty in his voice sent warmth spreading through Nora's chest. Before she could respond, however, the music changed to a lively reel, and several of her students rushed over to pull her into the dance. Miss Patterson, you have to join us. Young Mary Wilson insisted, tugging at her hand. Pa says it's a Virginia reel and everyone can dance it. Laughing, Nora allowed herself to be led away, casting an apologetic glance at Preston over her shoulder. He smiled and nodded, content to watch as she joined the line of dancers. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with more dancing, conversation, and even a brief singing performance by the Reverend's wife, who possessed a surprisingly fine soprano voice. Throughout, Nora was aware of Preston's steady presence, sometimes at her side, sometimes across the room in conversation with other men, but always with his attention returning to her like a compass finding north. It was late when they finally took their leave, thanking Judge Hollister for his hospitality. The night had grown cool, and Preston wrapped a blanket around Nora's shoulders as they settled in the wagon for the drive home. Did you enjoy yourself? He asked as they pulled away from the judge's ranch. Very much, Nora replied truthfully. It was a wonderful evening. Alina, seated on Nora's other side, nodded in agreement. Best social in years. The judge outdid himself with the refreshments. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the steady clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels. Alina eventually dozed off, her head nodding against Nora's shoulder. Poor thing, Nora murmured. She's exhausted. She insisted on coming, Preston said. Said she wouldn't miss seeing you enjoy your first proper social occasion under her watch. She's been very kind to me. You both have. Preston's eyes remained on the road ahead. It's not kindness, Nora, at least not only kindness. The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither could fully express under their current circumstances. 3 months, Nora said quietly, mindful of Alina's sleeping form beside her. 3 months until my contract ends. 3 months, Preston agreed. And then we'll talk. Properly talk about possibilities. Yes, Nora said, her heart lightening at the promise in his words. Possibilities. As August gave way to September, the rhythm of ranch life shifted with the changing season. Preparations for winter became more urgent: hay to be stored, late vegetables to be harvested and preserved, repairs to be completed before the first snows. The school continued to thrive, with Nora's students making remarkable progress. Word of her teaching abilities spread beyond Caldwell, bringing families from as far as 10 miles away seeking education for their children. One crisp Saturday morning in mid-September, Preston found Nora in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes. He watched for a moment, admiring the picture she made in the golden autumn light, before clearing his throat to announce his presence. You've become quite the gardener, he observed as she looked up. Alina says you have a natural touch with growing things. Nora smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. I find I enjoy it. There's something satisfying about nurturing plants from seed to harvest. Preston nodded, then seemed to gather himself for what he had come to say. Nora, I need to ride to Boise on business. The bank there handles my larger transactions, and there's a cattle buyer from California I need to meet with." "I see," Nora said, setting down her basket. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, perhaps 10 days at most." He hesitated. "I've put it off as long as I could, but with winter approaching, these matters need attention." "Of course." Nora tried to hide her disappointment. 10 days suddenly seemed an eternity after months of seeing Preston every day. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning, early." Preston stepped closer, his expression serious. "Joshua will be in charge of the ranch while I'm away. If there's any trouble, any at all, you're to go to him immediately." "I'm sure everything will be fine," Nora assured him. "We'll manage until you return." Preston nodded, though he still looked troubled. "I've also asked Samuel to check in daily. He'll bring you to and from school as usual." "You've thought of everything," Nora said with a small smile. "Almost as if you're worried about leaving us." "Not worried," Preston corrected. "Just cautious." They stood in silence for a moment, neither quite willing to acknowledge how much his absence would be felt. "Will you join me for a ride this afternoon?" Preston finally asked. "There's something I'd like to show you before I go." "Curious," Nora agreed. After lunch, Preston saddled 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding and a gentle mare for Nora. "It's not far," he assured her as he helped her mount. "Just over the eastern ridge." They rode in comfortable silence, Nora enjoying the crisp autumn air and the changing colors of the landscape. The aspens were turning golden, their leaves trembling in the light breeze, while the pines remained steadfastly green against the clear blue sky. After about an hour's ride, they crested a small hill and Preston reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing to a valley below. "What do you think?" Nora followed his gesture and saw a small clearing nestled among the trees. A stream ran along one edge, and in the center stood the beginnings of a cabin foundation laid, some walls partially raised. "What is it?" she asked, confused. "Land I purchased last spring," Preston explained. 40 acres with water rights. Good soil sheltered from the worst winter storms. He paused, then added quietly, "I started building a few months ago, when time allows." "A cabin?" Nora asked, still not understanding. "For what purpose?" Preston turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "For possibilities, Nora. For a future that might include more than what I have now." Realization dawned, and Nora felt her heartbeat quicken. "You're building this for us." "I'm building it for hope," Preston said carefully. "For what might be if you choose it when your contract ends." Emotion welled in Nora's chest, joy mingled with uncertainty. "Preston, I don't know what to say. This is too much," he asked, suddenly looking uncertain. "Too presumptuous." "No," she assured him quickly. "No, it's beautiful and thoughtful." "And perhaps a little presumptuous," she added with a smile to soften the words. Preston ducked his head, a rare bashfulness overtaking his usual confidence. "I wanted you to know that what I feel isn't casual or temporary, that I'm planning for more than just the present." "May I see it?" Nora asked, genuinely curious about this physical manifestation of Preston's hopes. They dismounted and tied the horses to a young aspen before walking down to the clearing. Up close, Nora could see that the cabin, though incomplete, was being built with care and skill. The foundation was solid stone, the partial walls made of sturdy logs carefully notched and fitted together. "It will have 3 rooms to start," Preston explained as they walked around the structure. "A main living area with a fireplace, a bedroom, and a smaller room that could be whatever is needed." "A nursery, perhaps," Nora suggested softly. Preston's eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability she rarely saw in him. "Perhaps, if that's something you might want, someday." Nora reached out and took his hand, her heart full of emotions she could no longer entirely contain. Preston, I can't pretend I know exactly what the future holds, but I do know that when my contract ends, I don't want to leave Caldwell, or you." Preston's fingers tightened around hers. "Nora, I know we agreed to wait," she continued quickly. "And there are still 2 months left on my contract. But seeing this, knowing you've been planning, hoping, I needed you to know that your hopes aren't misplaced." For a long moment, Preston simply looked at her, his expression a mixture of relief and joy. Then he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "2 more months," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And then, if you still feel the same, I have a question I very much want to ask you." Nora smiled through the tears that had somehow gathered in her eyes. "I look forward to hearing it." They stood together in the clearing, hands clasped, surrounded by the physical beginnings of a shared dream. Whatever uncertainties the future might hold in that moment, Nora knew with absolute clarity that her heart had found its home. Preston's departure the following morning was difficult despite the understanding they had reached. As he mounted his horse in the pre-dawn light, Nora stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "Remember what I said," Preston told her, his expression serious. "Any trouble at all, go to Joshua or Samuel immediately." "I will," Nora promised, "though I'm sure everything will be fine. Safe travels, Preston." He held her gaze for a long moment as if memorizing her face. 10 days at most," he said. "Take care, Nora." As she watched him ride away, Nora felt an unexpected sense of foreboding. She dismissed it as simple sadness at their temporary separation and turned back to the house to begin her day. The first few days of Preston's absence passed uneventfully. Samuel drove Nora to and from school as arranged, and Joshua checked in regularly to ensure all was well at the house. Eleanor kept Nora busy with autumn preserving and preparations for the coming winter, leaving little time for her to dwell on Preston's absence. On the 4th day, however, trouble arrived in an unexpected form. Nora was just dismissing her students when Augustus Hargrove appeared in the doorway of the schoolhouse. "Miss Patterson," he said smoothly, removing his hat, "might I have a word?" Nora glanced at Samuel, who waited outside with the wagon, then back to Hargrove. "My driver is waiting, Mr. Hargrove. Perhaps another time." "This won't take long," Hargrove insisted, stepping further into the room. "It's a matter of some importance regarding your contract." A chill ran down Nora's spine, but she maintained her composure. "My contract is with Mr. Vance. Any discussions regarding it should include him." "Ah, but that's precisely the point." Hargrove smiled, the expression not reaching his cold eyes. "Vance's absence provides us with an opportunity to discuss a potential transfer of that contract." "Transfer," Nora repeated, alarm growing. "Indeed. I'm prepared to offer Vance a substantial profit on his investment, say $1,500 for the remaining 2 months of your contract." "It's a generous offer that any businessman would find difficult to refuse." Nora gathered her papers with deliberate calm, though her hands wanted to shake. "Mr. Vance is not interested in selling my contract, Mr. Hargrove. He's made that quite clear." "Has he?" Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "Strange. My sources in Boise indicate he's experiencing some financial difficulties. The bank is calling in several of his loans early. $1,500 could solve many problems for a man in his position." The information struck Nora like a physical blow. Preston had never mentioned financial troubles, but she recalled his comment about the bank in Boise handling his larger transactions. Could Hargrove be telling the truth? "Whatever Mr. Vance's business with the bank, I'm certain he wouldn't consider transferring my contract," Nora said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's getting late, and I need to return to the ranch." She moved to step around him, but Hargrove shifted to block her path. Consider my offer carefully, Miss Patterson. 2 months under my roof would pass quickly enough, and I can be a generous employer to those who accommodate my requests. The implication in his words was unmistakable, and Nora felt a surge of revulsion. Move aside, Mr. Hargrove. My driver is waiting and people know where I am. For a tense moment, Hargrove remained in place, his eyes hard as he assessed her defiance. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped aside. Think about what I've said, he advised as she passed him. Vance may not have a choice in the matter if his financial situation is as precarious as I've heard, and if that's the case, you might prefer to have some say in where you land. Nora didn't dignify his words with a response, marching straight out to where Samuel waited with the wagon. As they drove away, she could feel Hargrove's eyes on her back, and a sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. "Everything all right, Miss Patterson?" Samuel asked, noting her pale face. Mr. Hargrove was being difficult, Nora said carefully. "Samuel, do you know if Mr. Vance is having financial problems?" The blacksmith frowned. "Not that I've heard. The ranch is doing well this year, good calf crop, plenty of hay put up." "Why do you ask?" "Just something Mr. Hargrove implied." Nora hesitated, then decided Samuel should know the full story. "He offered to buy my contract from Mr. Vance, said he'd pay $1,500 for the remaining 2 months. Samuel let out a low whistle. "That's a mighty steep price for 2 months' work." "Yes, and he suggested Mr. Vance might be forced to accept due to loans being called in by the bank in Boise." The blacksmith's frown deepened. "That doesn't sound right. Preston's always been careful with money, more conservative than most ranchers around here. But I suppose anything's possible." He glanced at Nora. "Don't worry, Miss Patterson. Preston would never sell your contract, especially not to Hargrove. He knows what kind of man Hargrove is." Nora nodded, though the seed of worry had been planted. What if Preston truly was in financial difficulty? What if he had no choice but to accept Hargrove's offer? That evening, she shared her concerns with a leaner, who dismissed them outright. "Augustus Hargrove is a snake," the older woman declared. "He's trying to frighten you, nothing more. Preston would never sell your contract, regardless of any financial considerations. He'd sell his own horse first." Nora wanted to believe her, but the days that followed did nothing to ease her worries. Twice more, Hargrove appeared at the schoolhouse at dismissal time, each time with the same offer and increasingly disturbing hints about Preston's financial situation. When Samuel confronted him on the third occasion, Hargrove merely smiled and said he was having a friendly conversation with the town's teacher, nothing more. By the 8th day of Preston's absence, 2 days before his expected return, Nora was a bundle of nerves. Hargrove's persistent attention had not gone unnoticed in the small community, and whispers had begun to circulate. Several mothers had approached Nora after school, expressing concern about Hargrove's interest and offering their homes as sanctuary if needed. On the afternoon of the 9th day, as Nora was gathering her teaching materials, the schoolhouse door opened to reveal not Hargrove, but his young wife, Vivian. "Mrs. Hargrove," Nora acknowledged warily. "What can I do for you?" Vivian closed the door behind her and approached Nora's desk with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Miss Patterson, I've come to warn you." "Warn me," Nora repeated, surprised, "about Augustus." Vivian glanced nervously toward the door. "He's determined to acquire your contract." "More determined than I've ever seen him about anything." Nora studied the younger woman's face, noting the shadows under her eyes and a fading bruise at her temple partially concealed by powder. "Has he hurt you, Vivian?" Vivian's hand flew to her temple. I fell. It's nothing." She straightened, visibly gathering her courage. "That's not why I'm here. Augustus has gone to meet Preston Vance on the road from Boys. He left this morning with 2 of his men. Alarm shot through Nora. What do you mean, gone to meet him? He plans to intercept Mr. Vance before he reaches Caldwell. He has papers for a transfer of your contract, and he intends to persuade Mr. Vance to sign them. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. He took guns, Miss Patterson. And I heard him tell his men that accidents happen on the road all the time. The implication was clear, and Nora felt ice form in her veins. Why are you telling me this? Why betray your husband? Tears filled Vivian's eyes. Because I know what Augustus is capable of. Because the woman before me in his household tried to hang herself after 3 months under his roof. Because marriage to him has shown me the monster behind the respectable facade. She wiped at her tears. And because you've been kind to the children at school, including my young cousins, when you had every reason to hold my behavior against them. Thank you for the warning, Nora said, her mind already racing ahead. Do you know which road they took, where they planned to intercept Preston? The main road from Boys, near Crooked Creek Crossing. Augustus knows Mr. Vance usually takes that route. Nora gathered her things quickly. I need to find Samuel and Joshua immediately. Is there anything else I should know? Just be careful, Vivian said, her eyes darting nervously toward the window. Augustus doesn't forgive those who cross him. If he knew I was here. He won't hear it from me, Nora promised. Go home now before you're missed. After Vivian slipped away, Nora rushed outside to find Samuel waiting with the wagon as usual. Her face must have betrayed her distress, for he immediately straightened in concern. Miss Patterson, what's happened? Quickly, Nora relayed Vivian's warning. Samuel's weathered face darkened with each word. We need to move fast, he said, helping her into the wagon. Crooked Creek is about 2 hours' ride from here. If Preston left Boys early this morning as planned, he could be approaching the crossing by now. They drove straight to the ranch, where Joshua was overseeing repairs to the corral fence. The foreman listened gravely to their news, then sprung into action. Samuel, saddle 4 horses the fastest we have. Diego, he called to the young horseman working nearby, run to the bunkhouse and get Timothy. Tell him to bring rifles. Nora watched the flurry of activity, her heart pounding. I'm coming with you, she said firmly when Joshua turned back to her. Miss Patterson, it's too dangerous. I'm coming, she repeated. Preston is in danger because of me. I won't sit here waiting and wondering. Joshua studied her determined expression, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but you'll stay back if there's trouble, understand? Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and riding hard toward Crooked Creek. Nora on the gentle mare Preston had chosen for her on their ride to the cabin site. Eleanor had wanted to come as well, but reluctantly agreed to stay behind in case Preston returned by another route. The autumn afternoon was waning as they rode, shadows lengthening across the landscape. Nora's thoughts were a tumult of fear and determination. The idea of Preston facing Hargrove and his men alone, possibly ambushed on the isolated road, filled her with dread. Yet beneath the fear was a steely resolve. She would not allow Hargrove to harm Preston or force him into any agreement regarding her contract. They rode largely in silence, saving their breath and their horses' strength for the journey. As they approached Crooked Creek, Joshua signaled for them to slow. The crossing is just ahead, he said quietly. We should proceed with caution. They dismounted and secured their horses in a stand of trees, then continued on foot. Joshua and Samuel took the lead, rifles ready, with Diego and Timothy flanking Nora protectively. The creek crossing came into view, a shallow ford where the road dipped down to meet the water. No one was visible, but fresh hoofprints in the mud suggested recent passage. Looks like several riders crossed not long ago, Samuel observed, kneeling to examine the tracks. Hard to tell if it was Vance or Hargrove's men. A sudden crack of a rifle shot shattered the stillness, the sound echoing from somewhere ahead along the road. That came from the ridge, Joshua said sharply. Move! They rushed forward, keeping to the tree line for cover. As they crested a small rise, a scene of confrontation came into view about a quarter-mile ahead. Preston sat astride his horse in the middle of the road, facing Augustus Hargrove and two rough-looking men. Even from a distance, Nora could see that Preston was holding his left arm, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve. "He's hurt," she gasped. "Looks like they've already fired a warning shot," Joshua said grimly. "Or a not-so-warning shot. We need to get closer." They worked their way through the trees, moving as quietly as possible while keeping the standoff in view. As they drew nearer, they could hear Hargrove's voice carrying on the still air. "Be reasonable, Vance. $1,500 for 2 months of a contract you paid only $1,000 for. It's good business." "There's nothing reasonable about this ambush, Hargrove," Preston replied, his voice steady despite his injury. "And Miss Patterson isn't a commodity to be traded." "Everything has its price," Hargrove insisted. "Even your principles, I'd wager. Especially with the bank breathing down your neck about those loans. My arrangements with the bank are none of your concern. Perhaps not, but your safe return to your ranch might be." Hargrove nodded to one of his men who raised his rifle again. "Sign the transfer, Vance." "It's a simple business transaction." Joshua signaled the others to spread out among the trees. "Samuel, circle around to the left. Diego, Timothy to the right. We'll surround them." He glanced at Nora. "Stay here, don't move until it's safe." As the men moved into position, Nora watched anxiously from her hiding place. Preston remained upright in his saddle, facing down Hargrove with unwavering composure despite the blood soaking his sleeve. "I won't sign," Preston said flatly. "Not for any amount. Now, either shoot me dead where I sit or let me pass. Those are your options, Hargrove." The cattle baron's face contorted with anger. "You stubborn fool. Do you think anyone would question if your body was found on this road? Robbery gone wrong, it happens all the time." "People would question," Preston countered. "Judge Hollister would question, and Miss Patterson would know exactly who was responsible." "The school teacher," Hargrove laughed harshly. "What could she do? A woman with no family, no connections, and a contract that would revert to the bank upon your death. Who do you think would buy that contract at auction, Vance? Who do you think would own her within a week of your funeral?" The casual cruelty of Hargrove's words ignited something in Nora. Without conscious thought, she stepped out from her hiding place. "I am not property to be owned, Mr. Hargrove," she called clearly, stepping into the road. All heads turned at her voice. Preston's eyes widened in alarm. "Nora, get back!" Hargrove recovered quickly from his surprise, a calculating smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, Miss Patterson herself come to join our negotiations. How convenient." Nora walked forward steadily, ignoring Preston's urgent signals to take cover. "There are no negotiations to be had, Mr. Hargrove. My contract is not for sale, not by Mr. Vance, not by anyone." "Bold words from a woman in your position," Hargrove sneered. "Perhaps you've forgotten that you're legally bound to whoever holds your contract. Your preferences don't enter into it. Perhaps you've forgotten that you're outnumbered," came Joshua's voice as he emerged from the trees, rifle aimed at Hargrove. Samuel, Diego, and Timothy appeared as well, their weapons trained on Hargrove's men. Hargrove's face darkened with fury as he realized the trap he'd fallen into. "This is a private business matter," he blustered. "You have no right to interfere." Ambushing a man on a public road hardly constitutes private business, Samuel observed dryly. And attempting to force him to sign papers at gunpoint sounds like robbery and assault to me. Preston urged his horse forward, positioning himself between Nora and Hargrove despite his injury. "It's over, Hargrove. Go back to Caldwell. If I see you anywhere near Miss Patterson again, I'll have charges filed with the territorial marshal." For a tense moment, it seemed Hargrove might resist. His hand hovered near his pistol as his eyes darted between the rifles aimed in his direction. Then, with a muttered curse, he nodded to his men. "This isn't finished, Vance," he warned as they turned their horses. "Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Preston said firmly. "Whatever grievance you think you have with me, leave Miss Patterson out of it. She's under my protection, and I don't give warnings twice." As Hargrove and his men rode away, Nora rushed to Preston's side. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," he assured her, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "What are you doing here, Nora? You could have been killed." "Vivian Hargrove warned me about her husband's plan," Nora explained as Samuel examined Preston's wound. "We couldn't let you face them alone." "Bullet grazed the upper arm," Samuel reported. "Bleeding's mostly stopped, but it needs cleaning and bandaging." "We can tend it when we get back to the ranch," Preston said, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "You shouldn't have come, but I'm glad you did." The ride back to the ranch was slower due to Preston's injury, but they arrived before full dark. Alina was waiting anxiously on the porch and hurried down to meet them as they approached. "Thank God," she exclaimed when she saw them. "When you didn't return, I feared the worst." Her eyes widened at the sight of Preston's bloodied sleeve. "Get him inside immediately. I'll fetch my medical supplies." Once in the house, Samuel and Joshua helped Preston to a chair in the kitchen while Alina prepared to clean and dress his wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed his upper arm, but the injury was painful and had bled considerably. "This will hurt," Alina warned as she began cleaning the wound with whiskey. Preston's jaw tightened, but he made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. His eyes sought Nora's across the room, and she moved to his side, taking his right hand in hers without hesitation. "Hargrove mentioned bank loans," she said quietly as Alina worked. "Is it true? Are you in financial difficulty?" Preston sighed. "Not the way he implied. The bank in Boise is changing ownership. The new managers are reviewing all outstanding loans and requiring additional collateral for some. It's an inconvenience but not a crisis." "But Hargrove knew about it," Nora pressed. "How?" "His father-in-law is a banking associate in Boise," Preston explained. "He must have access to information about clients' accounts." He squeezed her hand gently. "I was never in danger of losing the ranch, Nora, and I would never have considered selling your contract, regardless of any financial pressure." The certainty in his voice washed away the last of Nora's doubts. "I know," she said simply. "I never truly believed you would." Once Preston's wound was cleaned and bandaged, Alina insisted he rest. The ranch hands returned to their quarters after ensuring all was secure, leaving Preston, Nora, and Alina alone in the house. "You should get some sleep," Nora told Preston as he sat by the fire in the small parlor, looking pale but determined to remain upright. "You've lost blood and ridden for miles with an injury." "In a moment," he said, patting the seat beside him on the sofa. "Sit with me first, please." Alina excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone. Nora took the offered seat, suddenly shy despite all they had been through that day. "You could have been killed," Preston said quietly, breaking the silence. "Coming out into the open like that." "So could you," Nora countered. "Refusing to sign the transfer when you had 3 armed men facing you. It wasn't a choice." Preston's eyes, golden in the firelight, held hers steadily. I would never hand you over to Hargrove, not for any price, not under any circumstances. Nora's heart swelled at the simple declaration. And I couldn't hide in the trees while you faced danger because of me. Preston reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in his fingers. Do you remember what I said at the cabin site, about having a question for you when your contract ends? I remember, Nora said softly. Today made me realize that waiting might be a luxury we can't afford. Life on the frontier is uncertain at best, dangerous at worst. He took a deep breath, then continued. I love you, Nora. I think I've loved you since that first day, when you stood on that auction platform with your head high despite the rope on your wrists. When I cut those bonds, it wasn't just your hands that were freed, it was something in me too. Something I'd locked away after Margaret left. Tears filled Nora's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. Preston, I know there are still 6 weeks left on your contract, he went on, and if you want to wait until then for your answer, I'll understand. But I need you to know now I want you to stay, not as an employee but as my wife. If you'll have me. The simplicity and honesty of his proposal touched Nora deeply. Here was a man who had saved her from a terrible fate, who had given her back her dignity and purpose, who had shown her through actions more than words that she was valued for herself, not as property, not as a servant, but as a woman worthy of respect and love. I don't need to wait 6 weeks for my answer, she said, her voice steady despite the tears that spilled onto her cheeks. I love you, Preston Vance, and yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife. Joy transformed Preston's face, erasing the lines of pain and fatigue. Despite his injury, he pulled Nora gently into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I have nothing to offer but a half-built cabin and a modest ranch, he murmured against her hair. It's not much compared to the life you knew in Boston. Nora leaned back to look into his eyes. You offer me everything that matters: respect, purpose, partnership, love. That's worth more than all the fine houses in Boston. Preston raised a hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. May I kiss you, Nora Patterson? I've wanted to since the day at the lake. I've wanted you to since then as well, she admitted with a smile. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Nora met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that held all the tenderness and promise of their newfound understanding. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. I should speak to Judge Hollister about dissolving your contract immediately. There's no need for it to continue now. Let's wait, Nora suggested. Just until after we deal with Hargrove. I don't want him claiming you broke the contract terms by proposing to me while it was still in effect. Preston nodded reluctantly. You're right, Hargrove would use any excuse to cause trouble. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But we don't need to wait to marry. We could speak to Reverend Thompson as soon as my arm heals. What about the cabin? Nora asked. I thought you wanted to finish it first. We can live here until it's complete, Preston said. Unless you'd prefer to wait, Nora shook her head, smiling. After today, I don't want to wait for anything. Life is too uncertain, as you said. Preston's answering smile was everything Nora could have hoped for: tender, joyful, and filled with promise for their future together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most responded with warm congratulations, though there were inevitably some whispers about the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Judge Hollister, when informed, responded with hearty approval and an offer to perform the civil ceremony himself, if they preferred. Always thought you two were well matched, he told Preston when they visited his office to discuss legally dissolving Nora's contract after the wedding. From the moment I saw you dancing together at my social, the way you looked at each other, well, It was only a matter of time. Augustus Hargrove, unsurprisingly, was less enthusiastic about the development. Though he made no further direct approaches to either Preston or Nora, his influence was felt in small, spiteful ways, a sudden difficulty in securing certain supplies from merchants who depended on his business, rumors circulating about Preston's financial status, insinuations about Nora's character. "He's a petty man used to getting his way," a leaner observed when a shipment of winter supplies they had ordered failed to arrive. "But he'll tire of his games eventually, especially when he sees they have no effect." The wedding was set for the first Saturday in October, just 3 weeks after Preston's return from Boise. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Caldwell, followed by a celebration at the ranch for friends and neighbors. In the days leading up to the wedding, Nora divided her time between teaching, helping a leaner with wedding preparations, and visiting the cabin site with Preston when his arm had healed enough to resume work there. The structure was coming along well, with the walls fully raised and the roof nearly complete. "It will be ready by spring," Preston promised as they stood together in what would be the main room. "We can plant a proper garden then, and perhaps add a small stable for horses." Nora leaned against his side, enjoying the solid warmth of him. "It's going to be beautiful, our own little corner of Idaho." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with just enough autumn crispness in the air to hint at the winter to come. A leaner helped Nora dress in a gown of ivory satin that had been ordered from Boise Preston's wedding gift, delivered just days before. "You look radiant," the older woman said, stepping back to admire Nora in the simple but elegant dress. "Preston won't know what hit him." Nora smiled, touching the small cluster of wildflowers she would carry. "I can hardly believe this is happening. A year ago, I was struggling to keep a roof over my head after Father died, and now you're about to marry a good man who adores you," Elena finished. "Life takes unexpected turns, my dear. The trick is recognizing the good ones when they come along." Samuel drove them to the church in Preston's best wagon, decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. The small building was already filled with well-wishers, students and their families, neighboring ranchers, townspeople who had come to respect the new schoolteacher. Preston waited at the altar with Joshua as his best man, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit. But when the music began and Nora walked down the aisle on Judge Hollister's arm, the judge having offered to give her away in the absence of any family, all nervousness vanished from Preston's expression, replaced by a look of such profound joy and love that Nora's heart nearly burst with answering emotion. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Thompson speaking eloquently about the sacred bonds of matrimony and the particular beauty of a union founded on mutual respect and genuine affection. When it came time for the vows, Preston's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and protect Nora for all the days of their lives. "I take you, Nora Patterson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, holding her hands in his. "To share all that I am and all that I have, from this day forward in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." Nora repeated the vows with equal conviction, her voice clear despite the tears of happiness that threatened to overwhelm her. When Preston slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, another gift from Boise, but one she had seen before the ceremony, she felt as if her joy might lift her right off the church floor. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thompson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Vance, you may kiss your bride." Preston needed no further invitation. His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, appropriate for a church setting but leaving no doubt about the depth of his feelings. As they turned to face the congregation as man and wife, Nora caught sight of Vivian Hargrove slipping into the back of the church. Augustus was nowhere to be seen, but his wife offered a small, sad smile and a nod of acknowledgement before disappearing again. The celebration at the ranch afterward was everything a frontier wedding party should be: abundant food, music provided by local fiddlers, dancing in the yard, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. Judge Hollister made a toast that had everyone laughing. Eleanor wept happy tears, and even taciturn Joshua was seen to smile more than once. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Preston found Nora by the refreshment table and pulled her aside. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to my new name. It suits you." Preston kissed her temple. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." "Another one." The dress was more than generous, Preston, he smiled, reaching into his pocket. "This one is different, more significant." What he placed in her hand was a piece of paper, official-looking, with signatures and seals. Nora unfolded it curiously, then gasped as she realized what she was holding. "This is my labor contract," she said, looking up at him in confusion. "But it's dissolved," Preston finished. "Paid in full, with all obligations considered completed. Judge Hollister filed it this morning before the ceremony. You are no longer bound by any contract, Nora. You're completely free." Tears filled her eyes as she understood the significance of his gift. "You wanted to make sure I came to you as a free woman." "Yes," Preston's expression was earnest. "I wanted our marriage to begin with absolute clarity that you chose me freely, with no legal obligation influencing your decision." Nora touched his face tenderly. "I chose you the day you showed me the cabin, Preston Vance. Perhaps even before that. This paper changes nothing about how I feel." "I know," he said, covering her hand with his. "But it matters to me that there is nothing between us now but love and the vows we made today." Nora's response was to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Around them, the celebration continued, but for that moment they existed in a world of their own, a world built on respect, mutual choice, and a love that had begun the day. Cowboy cut the ropes from a woman's wrists and held her hands instead. 5 years later, on a warm spring day, Nora sat on the porch of the completed cabin, watching as Preston taught their 3-year-old son, James, how to gentle a new foal. Beside her, cradled in her arms, their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept peacefully, untroubled by the excited shouts of her brother. The years had brought changes to their lives. The school in Caldwell had grown, with Nora continuing to teach until James's birth, and now returning 2 days a week while Eleanor watched the children. Preston's ranch had prospered, allowing them to add more land to their holdings and hire additional hands. Augustus Hargrove had eventually overreached himself financially and been forced to sell most of his holdings. Vivian had left him, returning to her family in Boise with a substantial settlement thanks to Judge Hollister's intervention. The former cattle baron had moved on to Wyoming Territory, his influence in Caldwell diminishing to nothing more than an occasional mention in conversation. The cabin Preston had begun building before their marriage was now a proper home, expanded to include a larger kitchen, a study where Nora prepared her lessons, and additional bedrooms for their growing family. The garden she had dreamed of flourished in the rich soil, providing vegetables, herbs, and flowers that made the little homestead a place of beauty as well as practicality. As Nora watched her husband and son with the foal, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperation of the auction block to the joy of creating a life with the man who had cut her bonds, Her path had been unexpected but ultimately blessed. Preston looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and the smile they shared held all the warmth and understanding of their years together. Without words, it spoke of love freely chosen, of difficulties overcome, of a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. In that smile was the story of a rope cut in hands held not in ownership, but in the promise of walking side by side through whatever life might bring.